The train whistle screamed through the Arizona desert heat like a dying animal, and Victoria Lane pressed her face against the window glass, watching Yuma emerge from the shimmering horizon with all the promise of salvation or damnation. She could not yet tell which. The child in her arms stirred, his small fingers clutching at the worn fabric of her traveling dress. Samuel, she had named him in her heart, though the papers pinned to his blanket when she found him abandoned in that scent. Louis boarding house called him only baby boy, age approximately 18 months. Nobody had come for him in 3 weeks. Nobody had even inquired. When the landlady threatened to send him to the county orphanage, something in Victoria's chest had cracked open like an egg, and she had gathered him up along with her few belongings and purchased 2 tickets west with the last of her savings. That had been 16 days ago. 16 days of uncertain glances from other passengers, of whispered conversations that died when she walked past, of conductors asking pointed questions about the child's parentage that she could not honestly answer. She was 22 years old, unmarried, and traveling alone with a baby that looked nothing like her. Her dark hair and green eyes contrasted sharply with his blonde curls and blue gaze. Anyone with sense could see he was not hers by blood. But he was hers by choice, and that had to count for something. The train lurched and groaned as it pulled into the Yuma station, and Victoria stood on shaking legs. She had never been to Arizona territory, had never been west of the Mississippi until 2 weeks ago. Everything she owned was contained in one battered carpetbag, and the child in her arms represented every foolish, impulsive decision she had ever made. Her sister Margaret's last letter, sent from Boston 3 months prior, had been clear. Do not come here. Edmund has made his position plain. There is no place in his household for a woman who has refused 2 perfectly suitable marriage proposals in pursuit of ridiculous notions of independence. Find yourself a husband, Victoria, or find yourself alone. Victoria had chosen alone, or thought she had until Samuel. The platform was chaos, all dust and noise and shouting. Cowboys in dusty chaps and wide-brimmed hats mingled with Mexican laborers and Chinese railroad workers. Women in calico dresses hurried past with market baskets. A stagecoach waited near the depot, its horses stamping and blowing in the October heat. October of 1883, and Yuma was growing. She could see new construction everywhere, the raw lumber of unfinished buildings bright against the adobe and weathered wood of older structures. The Colorado River glinted in the distance, a ribbon of hope in the desert. Victoria stepped off the train, and immediately the heat hit her like a physical thing. St. Louis had been cool and misty when she left. This was something else entirely, a dry furnace that seemed to suck the moisture from her skin. Samuel whimpered, and she adjusted him on her hip, looking around with growing desperation. She needed water, shelter, and work in that order. The boarding house address she had copied from a newspaper advertisement was clutched in her free hand, the paper damp with sweat. "Miss, you need help with your bag." She turned to find a weathered porter, his face kind beneath a shock of white hair. "Thank you, but I can manage." "Could you direct me to Maple Street?" He pointed east. "3 blocks that way past the Mercantile. You got people here?" "Not yet." She tried to sound confident. His expression shifted, something like pity crossing his features, and she felt her spine stiffen. She had seen that look too many times already. Victoria hefted her carpetbag and started walking, Samuel growing heavier with each step. The boarding house address led her past a saloon where piano music drifted into the street, past a blacksmith's forge that added its heat to the already oppressive air, past a general store where women in respectable dresses gave her pointed stares. The boarding house, when she finally found it, was a narrow two-story structure badly in need of paint. A hand-lettered sign in the window read, "No rooms available." Victoria's heart sank. She stood on the street, swaying slightly, Samuel now fussing in earnest. Her arms ached. Her head throbbed. The sun seemed to press down on her shoulders like a physical weight. "You look lost." The voice came from behind her, and she turned to find a woman perhaps 10 years her senior, wearing a practical split skirt and blouse, her graying hair pulled back in a severe bun. "I was hoping for a room, but—" Victoria gestured helplessly at the sign. The woman studied her for a long moment, her gaze taking in every detail. The baby, the worn dress, the single bag, the absence of any male escort. Victoria lifted her chin, refusing to shrink under the scrutiny. "That your child?" Victoria hesitated only a moment. "Yes, husband." "No." The woman made a small sound, not quite disapproval, not quite sympathy. "I'm Martha Sullivan. I run the dress shop on 2nd Street. You looking for work?" "Yes." The word came out desperate, and Victoria hated herself for it. "Can you sew?" "Yes. I worked in a tailor shop in St. Louis for 3 years. Martha's eyebrows rose slightly. "Come with me." She led Victoria back toward the center of town, to a neat shop with a painted sign reading Sullivan's Dressmaking and Alterations. Inside, it was blessedly cooler, and Victoria nearly wept with relief. "Sit," Martha commanded, pointing to a chair near the window. She disappeared into a back room and returned with a cup of water and a small piece of bread. "For the baby." Victoria tore the bread into small pieces, and Samuel grabbed at them eagerly. She sipped the water slowly, trying not to gulp it down like an animal. "I have a spare room upstairs," Martha said abruptly. "It's small, barely fits a bed, but it's clean. You can have it in exchange for work. 6 days a week, sunrise to supper time. Sundays off. I'll provide 1 meal a day, dinner, and you're on your own for the rest. The baby stays quiet during business hours or the deal is off." "Understood." It was more than Victoria had dared hope for. "Yes, thank you. I don't know how to. Don't thank me yet. This is a business arrangement. You don't work, you don't stay, and people in this town will talk." A woman alone with a child, no husband, no family. That's fuel for every gossip from here to Phoenix. You want to survive in Yuma, you keep your head down and your mouth shut. Clear, clear. Martha nodded once sharply. "Good, finish your water, then I'll show you the room." The room was indeed tiny, barely large enough for the narrow bed and small washstand it contained. But the sheets were clean, and when Victoria laid Samuel on the mattress, he immediately curled up and closed his eyes, exhausted from the journey. She stood there for a moment, watching him sleep, and felt the full weight of what she had done settle over her. She was in a strange town, in a harsh territory, with no money and no prospects beyond the thin thread of mercy Martha Sullivan had offered. If this arrangement failed, she had nothing. No safety net, no family to return to, no home. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, she felt something almost like freedom. That first night she lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of Yuma. Distant voices, a dog barking, the creak of wagon wheels. Somewhere a woman laughed. Samuel snored softly beside her, one small hand flung across her arm in sleep. She had done it. She had taken a child nobody wanted and carried him across half a country to a place where nobody knew her story. Here, she could be whoever she claimed to be. Here, she could start fresh. The next morning, Martha put her to work immediately. A pile of mending sat in a basket by the window, and Victoria settled into the rhythm of it gratefully. Needle in, needle out, tiny stitches holding broken things together. Samuel played at her feet with a set of wooden blocks Martha produced from somewhere, and the hours passed in surprising peace. The shop had a steady stream of customers. farm wives needing simple repairs, ranch women ordering new dresses. Even a few of the saloon girls, who Martha treated with the same brisk professionalism she showed everyone else. "This town's got no time for airs," Martha explained during a brief afternoon lull. "Everybody's here trying to make something of themselves. Some fail, some succeed, most just survive. You judge people, they judge you back twice as hard." It was good advice, and Victoria tried to follow it. She kept her eyes on her work and her ears open. She learned that Yuma was a territorial prison town, that the Colorado River sometimes flooded, that the heat in summer could kill a person, that water was precious, that the railroad had brought both prosperity and problems. She also learned, after 3 days, that Martha's kindness had a source. Late one evening, after the shop closed, Martha poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from Victoria at the small table. "I had a daughter once," Martha said without preamble. "Name was Caroline. She got herself in trouble when she was 17 and I threw her out. Told her not to come back until she could tell me the father's name and bring him to marry her proper." Victoria's hand stilled on her cup. "She left town. I heard later she made it to California, had the baby, gave it up, married a miner eventually, died of fever 3 years ago." Martha's voice was flat, but her eyes were wet. "I never saw her again after the day I sent her away. Never got to tell her I was sorry, never got to meet my grandchild. Martha, I'm so sorry. Don't be. Just telling you why I took you in, not because I'm kind. Because I'm trying to balance the ledgers before I meet my maker." She took a long sip of coffee. "That baby's not yours by blood, is he?" Victoria considered lying, then discarded the idea. Martha deserved the truth. "No, I found him abandoned. Nobody claimed him. I couldn't just leave him." "So you took him and ran west?" "Yes," Martha nodded slowly. "That's either the bravest or the most foolish thing I've heard in a long time. Maybe both." She stood, collecting the cups. "Well, you're here now. Might as well make the best of it. 4 weeks passed." Victoria fell into a routine. Wake early, tend to Samuel, work in the shop, have dinner with Martha, sleep. It was a simple life, but it felt solid in a way nothing ever had before. Samuel was thriving, growing more verbal each day, calling her Mama now in his high, clear voice. The word made her heart ache every time. She learned to navigate Yuma's social hierarchies. The respectable wives who would nod to her on the street but never invite her to tea. The working women who treated her as one of their own. The men who tipped their hats politely and kept moving. Nobody asked too many questions, but nobody welcomed her either. She existed in a strange liminal space, accepted but not embraced. It was enough. It had to be enough. Then one Monday morning in early November, the bell above the shop door chimed and a man walked in who changed everything. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, hard build of someone who lived in the saddle. His face was weathered, probably in his late 20s, with dark hair that curled slightly beneath his hat and brown eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He moved with a careful economy of motion, like someone used to being watched. "Help you?" Martha called from where she was arranging bolts of fabric. "Looking for Miss Sullivan. Need some shirts mended." His voice was deep, quiet, with a slight drawl that spoke of Texas. "That's me." "Victoria, come take Mr. Walker's order." Victoria set down her sewing and approached the counter. The man, Walker, removed his hat and nodded to her politely. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the sunburn on his neck, the calluses on his hands. A working cowboy, she guessed, not a rancher. "What needs mending?" she asked, keeping her voice professional. He produced 3 shirts from a saddlebag, all with torn seams and missing buttons. "Nothing fancy, just need them serviceable." She examined each one, making mental notes. "Good quality fabric. well-worn but clean, a man who took care of his things. I can have these ready by Thursday. Obliged. He started to turn away, then paused, his gaze drifting past her to where Samuel was stacking blocks in the corner. Something flickered in his expression, too quick for her to read. "That's a fine boy," he said quietly. "Thank you." Victoria's hand automatically went to her collar, a defensive gesture she had developed. "How old is he?" "Nearly 2. Walker nodded, still watching Samuel. "My nephew was about that age when I last saw him. Same blonde hair." He seemed to shake himself, returning his attention to Victoria. "Thursday, then. What do I owe you?" She quoted a fair price, and he paid half up front without haggling. When the door closed behind him, Martha gave her a sharp look. "That's Pierce Walker. Runs cattle on the Double W Ranch about 10 miles north of town. Good man. Keeps to himself mostly, but he's honest. Lost his whole family to fever about 5 years back. Parents, 2 brothers, sister-in-law, nephew. Only one who survived." "That's terrible," Victoria murmured, already turning back to her work. But something about the encounter nagged at her. The way he had looked at Samuel, the sadness in his eyes. Thursday came, and Pierce Walker returned for his shirts. Victoria had done her best work on them, reinforcing the seams with tiny, careful stitches, replacing all the buttons with ones that matched the original color. He examined them carefully, running his thumb over her repairs. "This is fine work, better than I expected. Thank you. You new to Yuma? I don't recall seeing you before last week." "I arrived about a month ago, from St. Louis, long journey." It was a statement, not a question, but it hung in the air like an invitation to elaborate. Victoria didn't take it. "The shirts are $1.75, with the deposit you already paid." He paid the balance and collected his shirts, but he didn't leave immediately. Instead, he looked past her again to where Samuel was playing, then back to her face with an expression of careful consideration. "Miss Lane, would you and your boy like to join me for dinner at the hotel restaurant this evening, as thanks for the good work on these shirts?" The question caught her completely off guard. In the month she had been in Yuma, no one had invited her anywhere. Martha had warned her that a woman in her position wouldn't be included in polite society. "I don't think that's appropriate," she said carefully. "Why not? It's just dinner. Public place, nothing improper about it." His tone was mild, but his eyes were direct. "Unless you're expecting your husband to object, I'm not married. I know." He said it simply, without judgment. "Whole town knows. Also know you're working hard, keeping your head down, trying to make a life here. That deserves respect, and maybe a good meal that you don't have to cook yourself." Victoria felt something loosen in her chest. It was such a small thing, such a simple kindness, but after weeks of sideways glances and whispered comments, it felt enormous. "All right," she heard herself say. "What time?" 6 o'clock. I'll meet you there." After he left, Martha gave her a long, measuring look. "Be careful with that one. You said he was a good man." "He is. That's why you should be careful. Good men in this territory are rare, easy to get attached." But Victoria wasn't worried about attachment. She had Samuel to think about, a job to keep, a life to build. A simple dinner with a polite cowboy didn't mean anything, except it did. Pierce Walker arrived at the hotel restaurant exactly at 6, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt. Not one of the ones she had mended, she noticed. He had saved those for work. This one was newer, pressed, the kind of thing a man wore when he was trying to make a good impression. He stood when she entered with Samuel on her hip and pulled out chairs for both of them. Samuel, usually shy with strangers, studied Pierce with solemn curiosity. "Hello there, young man," Pierce said, offering his hand for Samuel to shake. Samuel giggled and grabbed his finger instead. They ordered beef stew and fresh bread, and Victoria tried to remember the last time she had eaten in a restaurant. Before she left St. Louis, certainly. Before she found Samuel. Back when she was a different person entirely. "How are you finding Yuma?" Pierce asked, cutting his meat into neat pieces. "Hot, dry, different from anywhere I've been before. It grows on you, the desert. Once you learn to see the beauty in it instead of just the harshness." He glanced at Samuel, who was gumming a piece of bread. "It's a good place to raise a child if you can handle the heat, space to grow, good schools opening up. The railroad brings opportunities." "You sound like you're trying to convince me to stay." "Maybe I am." He met her eyes directly. "We could use more people like you here, people willing to work hard, take chances." "Is that what I did? Take a chance? Biggest one there is. You left everything you knew and came west with a child. That takes courage." Victoria felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the temperature or desperation. Sometimes they're the same thing. He took a sip of water, then set down his glass with careful precision. "Can I ask you something? And you can tell me it's none of my business because it probably isn't." She braced herself. "All right. That boy, Samuel, is he yours?" The question should have made her angry. It was the one everyone wanted to ask, but most were too polite to voice. Instead, she found herself telling the truth. "No, not by blood. I found him abandoned in a boarding house in St. Louis. Nobody came for him. Nobody wanted him. So I took him, bought 2 train tickets, and came as far west as my money would carry me." She lifted her chin, daring him to judge her. "I know what people think. I don't care. He needed someone and I needed him. That makes us family." Pierce was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said very softly, "That's the most extraordinary thing I've ever heard." She hadn't expected that. "You don't think I'm foolish. I think you're brave." He reached across the table and very briefly touched her hand. "And I think Samuel is lucky to have you." The touch lasted only a second, but Victoria felt it like a brand. She pulled her hand back, suddenly confused by the intensity of her own reaction. "Why are you being kind to me?" she asked, more sharply than she intended. "You don't know anything about me. I know you mend shirts better than anyone I've seen. I know you work hard. I know you love that little boy enough to risk everything for him. That's enough. Is it? Because in my experience, people always want something." Pierce leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Fair enough. You want to know what I want. I want to have dinner with someone who isn't a ranch hand or a saloon keeper. I want to talk to someone who actually listens when I speak. I want to look across a table and see possibility instead of just another empty evening." He paused. "And I want to understand what kind of woman has the courage to do what you've done, because I've never met anyone like you before." The honesty in his voice disarmed her completely. Victoria found herself smiling, a real smile, the first in weeks. "I don't know if I'm courageous or just stubborn. Maybe both." He smiled back, and it transformed his face, making him look younger, less weathered. "Can I see you again? Take you and Samuel for a ride in my wagon this Sunday, show you some of the prettier parts of the desert. I don't know if that's wise. Probably isn't. But will you come anyway?" She should say no. Should protect herself and Samuel from the complication of letting anyone else into their small, careful world. But when she looked at Pierce Walker, with his honest eyes and his gentle hands and the way he spoke to Samuel like the child mattered, she found herself nodding. "Yes, we'll come." Sunday arrived bright and clear, the November air finally cooling into something bearable. Pierce pulled up outside Martha's shop in a sturdy wagon pulled by 2 well-groomed horses. He helped Victoria up to the seat and lifted Samuel with careful hands, settling the boy between them. "Where are we going?" Victoria asked as they rolled out of town. "There's a spot about 5 miles north where the river bends and there's actual trees. Cottonwoods, shade. It's about as close to paradise as you'll find in this desert. He was right. When they arrived, Victoria gasped at the sudden change in landscape. The harsh browns and grays of the desert gave way to a ribbon of green along the river. Cottonwood trees spread their branches wide, their leaves golden in the autumn light. Birds sang in the branches. The sound of running water was like music. "It's beautiful," she breathed. Pierce spread a blanket under the largest tree, and they sat in the dappled shade while Samuel toddled around, fascinated by everything. Pierce had brought lunch: bread, cheese, apples, and cold chicken. Simple fare, but it tasted like a feast. "Tell me about your family," Pierce said, watching Samuel chase a butterfly. Victoria hesitated, then decided she owed him some truth. "My parents died when I was 19. Cholera. I have one sister, Margaret, who married well and moved to Boston. She made it clear I wasn't welcome unless I found a husband she approved of. I tried. Twice I got engaged, twice I broke it off. Why? Because they didn't want me. They wanted a wife, any wife, someone to cook and clean and bear children and not have opinions. I wanted more than that. I wanted to matter." Pierce nodded slowly. "And now I'm here with Samuel, building something that's mine." She picked at the blanket. "What about you? Martha said you lost your family." His expression darkened. 5 years ago, fever swept through the ranch. Took them all in less than a week. Ma, Pa, both my brothers, my brother Daniel's wife Sarah, and their little boy Timothy. He was 18 months old, same age as Samuel is now. Oh, Pierce." Victoria's hand found his without conscious thought. "I was in Tucson, buying cattle. By the time I got back, they were all gone, buried in the family plot up on the hill behind the ranch house." His voice was steady, but she could hear the pain beneath it. "I almost sold the place. Couldn't bear being there with all the ghosts. But then I realized that if I left, they'd really be gone. At least if I stayed, kept the ranch running, they'd be part of something continuing. That must be so hard." "It is. But you learn to live with it. You learn that life keeps going whether you're ready or not." He turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. "And then sometimes you meet someone who reminds you why it's worth going on." Victoria's breath caught. "Pierce, I'm not looking for a husband. I know." He smiled slightly. "And I'm not looking for a wife. But maybe we could look for something else. Friendship, companionship, someone to share Sunday dinners with. Just Sunday dinners, to start with." His thumb brushed across her knuckles. "Unless you want more." She should pull her hand away. Should maintain the careful distance she had built around herself and Samuel. But his touch felt too good, too solid, too real. "I don't know what I want," she admitted. "That's all right. We can figure it out together." They sat there in the shade, hands linked, watching Samuel play, and Victoria felt something shift in her chest. Hope, maybe, or the beginning of trust. The weeks that followed fell into a new pattern. Pierce came to town every Thursday for one reason or another, always stopping by the dress shop. Sometimes he needed mending. Sometimes he was just passing by. Always, he stayed to talk, to watch Samuel, to make Victoria laugh with stories of ranch life. On Sundays, they went on outings, sometimes back to the river, sometimes to other spots Pierce knew, hidden corners of beauty in the harsh landscape. Once, they took Samuel to see the territorial prison, its stone walls imposing against the sky. Samuel had been fascinated by the guard towers. People talked, of course. Victoria heard the whispers, saw the knowing looks. Martha warned her that her reputation, already fragile, was getting worse. "Folks are saying you're setting your cap for Pierce Walker," Martha said one evening over dinner. "That you came to town specifically to trap a lonely rancher." "That's ridiculous. I didn't even know he existed until he walked into the shop." "I know that. You know that. Doesn't matter what people think they know." Martha sighed. "Just be careful, Victoria. If this thing with Pierce doesn't work out, you'll have a hard time recovering from it." But Victoria was beyond careful. She was falling in love she hadn't meant to, had tried not to. But Pierce made it impossible. He was kind to Samuel, patient and gentle, treating the boy like he was precious. He listened when she talked, really listened, asking thoughtful questions and remembering the details. He made her laugh. He made her feel seen. And the way he looked at her, like she was the answer to a question he had been asking for years, made her heart race every time. It was early December, nearly 2 months since she had arrived in Yuma, when everything changed. They were at the river again, Samuel napping on the blanket between them. Pierce had been quiet all afternoon, thoughtful in a way that made Victoria nervous. "What's wrong?" she finally asked. "Nothing's wrong." He turned to face her fully. "Victoria, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you respond. Can you do that?" Her heart started pounding. "All right." When you walked into that shop with Samuel, it was like getting struck by lightning. Not just because you're beautiful, though you are, but because I saw myself in you. Someone who had lost everything and was trying to build something new from the ashes. Someone who took a child that wasn't theirs by blood and loved him anyway, the way I wish I could have done for Timothy. He took a shaky breath. "I've been alone for 5 years. I thought I'd be alone forever, but then you came and suddenly I could see a different future." "Pierce, let me finish." His hand found hers. "I know this is fast. I know we've only known each other 8 weeks. I know you came here looking for independence, not a husband. But Victoria, I love you. I love you and I love Samuel, and I want to give you both a home. Not just shelter, but a real home. A family. The ranch, the land, all of it. I want to teach Samuel to ride. I want to see him grow up. I want to give you the life you deserve, where you're not working yourself to exhaustion in a dress shop, but building something that's yours." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "You can't possibly love me. You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you're brave and fierce and kind. I know you fight for what you believe in. I know you love that little boy enough to face down a whole judgmental town. I know that when you smile at me, it feels like the sun coming out." He squeezed her hand. "I'm not asking you to love me back, not yet. I'm just asking you to give me a chance. Marry me, Victoria. Let me claim you both. Let me give Samuel my name and you my protection and both of you my heart." The words echoed the thought she had carried ever since that first day on the train platform. Nobody claimed them. And here was Pierce Walker, this lonely cowboy, saying the exact words she had needed to hear. "I claim you both. I do love you," she whispered. "That's what scares me. I've known you 8 weeks and I love you, and that seems impossible." "Why impossible?" "Because love is supposed to take time. You're supposed to court properly for a year at least, and then there's an engagement and then marriage, and it all follows rules. To hell with rules." He cupped her face with his free hand. "We're in the Arizona desert, not Boston. Different rules apply here. Out here, when you find something good, you hold on to it with both hands because you don't know if you'll ever get another chance. What about Samuel? Taking on a child that isn't yours by blood will be the greatest honor of my life." Pierce's voice was fierce. "That little boy deserves a father. I may not be perfect, but I swear to God I'll do my best by him. I'll love him like he's mine because he will be mine, ours. If you say yes." Victoria looked down at Samuel, sleeping peacefully, his blonde curls damp with sweat. Then back at Pierce, with his honest eyes and his scarred hands and his heart laid open before her. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." Pierce's face transformed with joy. He leaned in and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. It was Victoria's first real kiss, and it felt like coming home. They were married 3 weeks later, just before Christmas of 1883, in a simple ceremony at the Yuma courthouse. Martha stood as witness, along with Pierce's foreman, a weathered man named Tom Casey. Samuel, dressed in new clothes Martha had sewn specially for the occasion, clutched Victoria's skirt and babbled happily throughout the brief proceedings. Judge Hammond, a stern man with impressive whiskers, looked at them over his spectacles before beginning the ceremony. "Mr. Walker, you understand you'll be taking legal responsibility for this child." "Yes, sir. I'm adopting him as my own. Already filed the papers." The judge nodded approvingly. "Good man. We need more of that." He turned to Victoria. "And you, Miss Lane, you understand that marriage in the Arizona Territory means you'll be subject to your husband's authority under the law." Victoria lifted her chin. "I understand the law, Your Honor, but my husband understands that I'm not the subject type." Pierce choked back a laugh. Even the judge's lips twitched. "Fair enough. Let's proceed." When it was done, when the papers were signed and they were legally bound, Pierce picked up Samuel and took Victoria's hand, and they walked out into the December sunshine as a family. The Double W Ranch was 10 miles north of Yuma, nestled in a valley where a tributary of the Colorado River provided year-round water. The ranch house was solid adobe, built to withstand the desert heat, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Behind it stood a barn, corrals, and several smaller outbuildings. Pierce had spent the weeks before the wedding preparing. He had built Samuel a small bed and placed it in the largest bedroom. He had stocked the kitchen with supplies. He had even hung curtains in the windows, awkward, uneven things that made Victoria's heart clench with tenderness. "I know it's not fancy," he said as he lifted her down from the wagon, "but it's sound, and it's yours now. All of it." Victoria walked through the house slowly, taking it in. The simple furniture, well made and well kept. The stone fireplace in the main room. The kitchen with its good cook stove and deep sink. The bedroom with its large bed and those crooked curtains. "It's perfect," she said, and meant it. That night, after Samuel was asleep in his new bed, Pierce took Victoria's hand and led her to their bedroom. She was nervous, had been dreading this moment all day. She knew what was expected on a wedding night, had heard enough whispered conversations among married women to understand the basics. But knowledge and experience were different things. Pierce must have sensed her anxiety because he moved slowly, carefully. He kissed her gently, his hands staying over her clothes, just holding her. "We don't have to do anything tonight," he murmured against her hair. "We have all the time in the world." "I want to," she whispered back. "I'm just nervous, so am I." She pulled back to look at him in surprise. "You are." "I haven't been with a woman since my wife died, and even then it wasn't like this. That was an arrangement, a marriage of convenience between neighboring ranches. This is different. You're different. I want it to be right." His honesty steadied her. Victoria reached up and touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw. "Then we'll figure it out together." They did, slowly and sweetly, learning each other in the darkness. Pierce was patient, attentive, making sure she was comfortable every step of the way. When it was over, Victoria lay in his arms, feeling changed in some fundamental way. Not just because of the physical act, but because of the trust it represented. She had given herself to this man, this stranger who had become her husband, and he had treated her like something precious. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too." His arms tightened around her. "Both of you, my family." The word settled over her like a blessing. Family. After so many years of feeling untethered, she finally belonged somewhere. The first weeks of marriage were an adjustment. Victoria had never lived on a ranch before, had never even been on a horse. Pierce taught her to ride, holding the reins alongside hers until she got the feel of it. Samuel was too young to ride alone, but Pierce fashioned a special seat on his saddle where the boy could sit safely in front of him. She learned the rhythm of ranch life. Early mornings feeding chickens and collecting eggs. Days spent cooking for Pierce and the 3 ranch hands he employed. Evenings watching the sunset paint the desert in impossible colors. Nights in Pierce's arms, learning the language of marriage. Samuel thrived. He grew inches seemingly overnight, his vocabulary expanding daily. He started calling Pierce Papa within the first month, and the look on Pierce's face when he first heard it made Victoria's eyes sting with tears. Christmas that year was simple but perfect. Pierce had cut a small pine tree during a trip to the mountains and dragged it home. They decorated it with strings of popcorn and paper chains Victoria taught Samuel to make. Pierce carved wooden toys for Samuel, a horse, a wagon, a simple puzzle. On Christmas morning, Pierce gave Victoria a leather-bound journal. "For your thoughts," he said. "Figured you might want to write things down, our story, Samuel's story, how you came to be here." She ran her fingers over the smooth leather, overwhelmed. "Pierce, this is too much." "It's not enough. It'll never be enough." He kissed her forehead. "I want our grandchildren to know how brave their grandmother was, how she crossed half a country to save a child, how she built a life from nothing. Our grandchildren." She looked up at him with raised eyebrows. He flushed slightly. "Well, I'm hoping we'll give Samuel some brothers or sisters eventually, and then they'll have children and—" He trailed off, looking endearingly flustered. Victoria laughed and pulled him down for a kiss. "I hope so too." By February she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks before she was certain. The familiar signs her married friends had whispered about: morning nausea, overwhelming fatigue, breasts tender to the touch. When her monthly courses failed to arrive for the second time, she could no longer deny it. She told Pierce on a cold evening as they sat by the fire, Samuel already asleep. "I'm going to have a baby," she said quietly. He went very still, his eyes searching her face. "You're sure?" "Yes." "When?" "September, I think. Maybe October." He didn't say anything for a long moment, and fear clutched at Victoria's heart. Maybe he didn't want more children. Maybe the memory of losing his nephew was too fresh. Maybe then he pulled her into his arms and held her so tightly she could barely breathe. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick. "Thank you, thank you, thank you. You're happy." Happy doesn't begin to cover it. He pulled back to look at her, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "Victoria, you've given me everything. A wife, a son, and now another child. You've given me a future. How could I be anything but happy?" The pregnancy was difficult. The desert heat, which had seemed merely uncomfortable before, became oppressive as her body changed. Morning sickness plagued her well into the 4th month. Pierce was endlessly patient, bringing her water, holding her hair when she was sick, taking over the heavier household chores without complaint. Samuel, now 2.5, was fascinated by the changes in his mother's body. He would press his small hands against her growing belly and giggle when the baby kicked. "Baby," he would say proudly. "My baby." "Our baby," Victoria would correct gently. "Your little brother or sister." Martha came to visit in late August, bringing supplies and moral support. She had closed the dress shop for the day to make the trip, and Victoria was absurdly touched by the gesture. "You look well," Martha said, surveying her critically. "Tired, but well. How are you feeling?" "Like I'm carrying a watermelon," Victoria admitted. "But the doctor says everything looks good, baby's strong and healthy." "And Pierce," Victoria smiled. "He's wonderful, anxious but wonderful. He worries too much." "Good, a man should worry about his wife." Martha unpacked her basket, pulling out jars of preserves and a new baby blanket she had knitted. "I brought these for you, and I wanted to say something." "What?" "I was wrong about you. When you first arrived, I thought you were running away from trouble. Turns out you were running toward something better. "You've made a good life here, Victoria. You should be proud. I couldn't have done it without you. If you hadn't given me that room, that job, you would have found another way. You're that kind of person." Martha squeezed her hand. "But I'm glad I could help. Feels like maybe I made things right with Caroline somehow." Victoria went into labor on a scorching afternoon in late September. Pierce had been working in the south pasture and came racing back when Tom rode out to get him. He burst into the bedroom wild-eyed and dusty, and Victoria would have laughed if the contractions weren't so intense. "I'm here," he said, taking her hand. "I'm here, love. What do you need? Water. And someone to watch Samuel." Tom's wife, Mary, who lived in one of the ranch hands' cottages, took Samuel away despite his protests. The doctor arrived an hour later, a calm, older man named Garrett who had delivered half the babies in Yuma County. Labor was long and hard. Victoria had never experienced pain like this, wave after wave of it, seemingly endless. Pierce stayed beside her the entire time, letting her squeeze his hand until she thought she might break his fingers, wiping her forehead with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement. "You can do this," he kept saying. "You're so strong. You can do this." Finally, as the sun was setting, painting the bedroom walls gold and orange, she gave one last tremendous push and felt the baby slide free. A moment of silence, and then a thin, angry wail filled the room. "It's a boy," Dr. Garrett announced, holding up a red, squalling infant. "Healthy lungs on this one." Pierce's face crumpled. He bent over Victoria, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips, tears streaming down his face. "You did it," he breathed. "God, Victoria, you're amazing." She was too exhausted to respond, but she managed a weak smile as the doctor placed the cleaned, wrapped baby in her arms. He was beautiful, with dark hair like Pierce's and a scrunched, red face that looked indignant at being born. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." They named him Michael Thomas Walker, after Pierce's father and the foreman who had stood witness at their wedding. Samuel was entranced by his baby brother, wanting to touch him constantly, to be involved in every diaper change and feeding. "Gentle," Victoria would remind him as he stroked the baby's downy hair. "Very gentle." "I good brother," Samuel would announce proudly. Pierce was equally smitten. He would sit for hours just watching Michael sleep, or pace the floor with him when he cried, singing old cowboy songs in his deep, off-key voice. Victoria would watch them together, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. "You're a natural father," she told him one evening as he rocked Michael back to sleep. "I'm still terrified I'll do something wrong," he admitted. "But I love them so much, both of them. I never knew I could feel like this." Like what? Complete. The years that followed were full and rich. Samuel grew into a bright, active boy, curious about everything, eager to help with ranch work. Pierce taught him to ride when he was 4, and soon he was following his father everywhere, a miniature cowboy in child-sized boots and hat. Michael was quieter, more contemplative, but equally beloved. He had Victoria's green eyes and a sweet temperament that made everyone love him. In 1886, when Michael was 2, Victoria had another baby, a girl they named Sarah, after Pierce's late sister-in-law. She had Pierce's dark eyes and Victoria's determination, and from the moment she could walk, she was trying to keep up with her brothers. The ranch prospered. Pierce was a good manager, careful with money, wise about when to expand and when to hold steady. They added more cattle, bought neighboring land when it became available, built a bigger barn. The house grew too, as Pierce added rooms to accommodate their expanding family. Victoria never went back to dressmaking professionally, but she sewed for pleasure, making clothes for the children and curtains for the ever-growing number of windows. She also started teaching, gathering the ranch children and eventually children from neighboring spreads for lessons in reading, writing, and arithmetic. Pierce built a small schoolhouse near the main ranch house, and Victoria found she loved teaching almost as much as she loved her own family. Samuel, now officially Samuel Walker, never asked about his birth parents. As far as he was concerned, Victoria and Pierce were his mother and father, full stop. When he was 8, Victoria showed him the papers she had found pinned to his blanket that day in St. Louis. "I want you to know the truth," she said gently. "You didn't grow in my belly like Michael and Sarah did, but you grew in my heart from the moment I found you." Samuel studied the yellowed papers thoughtfully, then handed them back. "Doesn't matter," he said simply. "You're my mama, Papa's my papa." That's the truth. She held him tight, this boy who had changed the entire course of her life, and thanked God for abandoned boarding houses and train tickets west. Martha visited regularly, becoming Aunt Martha to the children, a beloved fixture at birthday parties and holidays. She eventually sold her shop and retired to a small house in Yuma, where she spent her days gardening and spoiling her adopted nieces and nephews. In 1891, when Samuel was 10, Michael was 5, and Sarah was 3, the territorial governor came through Yuma on a tour. He stopped at the Double W, having heard about Pierce's success and wanting to see the operation firsthand. Over dinner, he told them that Arizona would likely become a state within the decade. "This territory's growing," he said, accepting a second helping of Victoria's roast beef. "We've got the railroad, the mining, the ranching. People are flooding in. In 10 years, maybe less, we'll have enough population to apply for statehood. You folks are building the future of Arizona." After he left, Victoria and Pierce sat on the porch, watching the stars come out. "Did you ever imagine this?" Victoria asked. "Back when we met, not even in my wildest dreams," Pierce admitted. "I was so lonely, Victoria, so lost. And then you stepped off that train with Samuel and everything changed." "I was terrified," she confessed. "I had no plan. No idea what I was doing, just a desperate hope that things would somehow work out. They did more than work out. They became perfect." He pulled her closer. "You know what I think about sometimes? What would have happened if I hadn't needed those shirts mended? If I'd gone to a different shop or waited another week, we might never have met. I don't believe that. I think we were always going to find each other. Maybe not that exact way, but somehow, some people are just meant to be together." "You really believe that?" "I do. You were my lonely cowboy, the one who said he claimed us both. And we were your second chance at family. We needed each other." He kissed her then, sweet and slow, the way he still did after 8 years of marriage. Some things never got old. The children grew. Samuel became a skilled horseman and cattleman, working alongside Pierce by the time he was 14. He was patient with the animals and fair with the hired hands, and everyone agreed he'd make a fine rancher someday. Michael surprised them all by developing a passion for books. He devoured every volume they could get him and talked constantly about going to university someday. Pierce, who had limited formal education himself, was fiercely proud and began saving money for Michael's eventual schooling. Sarah was pure fire and determination. She could outride most of the ranch hands by the time she was 8, and she informed her parents regularly that she had no intention of being a delicate lady. "I'm going to run this ranch someday," she announced at dinner one evening when she was 9. "What about Samuel?" Pierce asked, amused. "Samuel can help, but I'll be in charge." She said it with such confidence that no one doubted her. In 1895, Victoria and Pierce celebrated their 12th wedding anniversary. The children threw them a party, complete with a slightly lopsided cake that Michael had baked and decorations Sarah had made. Samuel, now 13 and already taller than his mother, gave a toast. "To Mama and Papa," he said, raising his glass of apple cider. "Thank you for being the best parents anyone could ask for. Thank you for taking a chance on a baby nobody wanted. Thank you for showing us what love looks like." There wasn't a dry eye in the house. That night, lying in bed, Victoria reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From that desperate young woman on a train, clutching an abandoned baby and heading into the unknown, to this. A full life, a loving husband, 3 wonderful children, a home that was truly hers. "What are you thinking about?" Pierce asked, his fingers trailing through her hair. "How lucky I am." "We're both lucky. Do you ever regret it? Taking on someone else's child, taking on me with all my stubborn independence and unconventional ideas?" "Never." He said it firmly, without hesitation. "You and Samuel are the best things that ever happened to me. You saved me, Victoria. I was dying inside, going through the motions, and you brought me back to life. You saved me too. I was so scared, so alone, and then there you were, this lonely cowboy, saying exactly what I needed to hear." "I claim you both now," Pierce murmured, repeating the words he had said all those years ago in his proposal. "I still mean it. Every day I claim you. Every day I choose this life, this family, you. And I choose you. Always." They made love slowly, tenderly, 12 years of intimacy and trust woven into every touch. Afterward, Victoria lay awake listening to Pierce's steady breathing, feeling deeply content. The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and milestones. Samuel courted and married the daughter of a neighboring rancher when he was 22, a sweet girl named Emma who fit into the Walker family as if she'd always been there. They built a house on the southern edge of the Double W property and started their own herd. Michael, true to his ambitions, went east to university, studying engineering. His letters home were full of excitement about his classes and the wider world, but he always promised to return to Arizona eventually. Sarah, at 16, was running more of the ranch operations than anyone, much to her father's proud amusement. She had no interest in marriage, she declared regularly, just in good horses and fair cattle prices. Pierce, now in his early 50s, had threads of gray in his hair but was still strong and active. He and Victoria would ride out together in the evenings, just the two of them, recapturing those early days of courtship. In 1901, Victoria's sister Margaret came to visit for the first time. Her husband had passed away the year before, and she arrived in Yuma looking frail and uncertain, nothing like the confident society woman Victoria remembered. "I know I have no right to ask," Margaret said on their first evening together, "but could I stay for a while? I have nowhere else to go." Victoria thought of that long-ago letter, the one that had essentially disowned her. She thought about bitterness and grudges, about family and forgiveness. Then she thought about the life she had built, the love she had found, and realized she had no room in her heart for anything but grace. "Stay as long as you like," she said simply. "Your family." Margaret ended up staying 6 months, long enough to fall in love with the desert, the ranch, and most surprisingly with Martha Sullivan. They became inseparable friends, and when Margaret finally returned to Boston to settle her affairs, she came back to Yuma for good, moving into Martha's house and helping run a new school that the town was building. "I wasted so much time being judgmental," Margaret confessed to Victoria one afternoon. "You were right all along. Independence, choosing your own path, taking risks, those aren't shameful things. They're brave things." "I was terrified most of the time," Victoria admitted, "but I had no choice. It was risk everything or lose myself completely. And you ended up with all of this." Margaret gestured around the prosperous ranch, at the children and grandchildren playing in the yard, at Pierce riding in from checking the herd. You built something extraordinary, Victoria. We built it. Pierce and I together. That's the secret, I think. Finding someone who wants to build alongside you, not someone who wants to build a cage around you. In 1906, Samuel and Emma's first child was born, a boy they named Pierce Timothy Walker. Holding his grandson for the first time, Pierce wept openly. "He has Timothy's eyes," he whispered to Victoria. "After all these years, it's like getting a piece of him back." "You honored his memory," Victoria told him. "By being a father to Samuel, by building this family, by keeping going when everything seemed lost. Timothy would be proud of you." That grandchild was followed by others. Samuel and Emma had 3 more children over the next 8 years. Michael came home from university with a wife, a fellow student named Anna, and they settled in Yuma, where Michael opened an engineering firm. Their children came along in due course. Even Sarah, who had sworn off marriage, fell in love at 23 with a veterinarian who came to treat the ranch horses. Daniel Prescott was quiet and patient, and completely unfazed by Sarah's strong personality. They married in 1908 and continued working the ranch together, a true partnership that made Victoria smile every time she saw them. By 1910, Arizona was on the verge of statehood, just as the governor had predicted all those years ago. Victoria and Pierce, now in their mid-50s and early 60s respectively, sat on their porch surrounded by children and grandchildren, watching the sunset paint the desert in familiar colors. "We did it," Pierce said softly. "We built a legacy." "We built a family," Victoria corrected. "The legacy is just a happy side effect." "Tell me the story again, Grandma," begged little Pierce Timothy, now 4 years old. "About how you found Uncle Samuel on the train." Victoria smiled and pulled him into her lap. The story had become family legend, told and retold until it had achieved almost mythical status. "It wasn't on the train," she corrected gently. "It was in a boarding house in St. Louis, a long, long time ago. I was young and scared and all alone, and I found a baby that nobody wanted. And I thought to myself, this child needs someone to love him, and I need someone to love. So I took him, and we got on a train, and we came to Yuma." And then what happened? This from Michael and Anna's oldest, who had heard the story a dozen times but never tired of it. "Then I met your grandfather, the loneliest cowboy in all of Arizona, and he looked at me and Samuel, and he said 5 words that changed everything. I claim you both now." Pierce reached over and took her hand, squeezing gently. Even after nearly 30 years, the touch still sent warmth through her. "And they lived happily ever after," Samuel finished, coming up the porch steps with Emma and their youngest child. "The end." "Not the end," Victoria corrected, looking around at all the faces she loved. "Just the beginning. Everything else was the adventure." As the stars came out and the children were eventually herded off to bed, Victoria and Pierce sat alone in the darkness, hands still linked. "Any regrets?" Pierce asked, the same question they had asked each other countless times over the years. "Not a single one." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "You? Only that we didn't have more time. That life goes so fast. Then we'll make the most of what we have left. We'll watch our grandchildren grow. We'll keep building this ranch, this family, this life. We'll love each other as hard as we can for as long as we're given. Deal." He kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Victoria Walker. From that first moment in the dress shop until my last breath, I love you. And I love you, Pierce Walker. My lonely cowboy who claimed us both and gave us the world." They sat there until long after dark. 2 people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a family from nothing, who had turned desperation into hope and loneliness into love. Behind them, the house was full of the sounds of their legacy. Children's laughter, dishes clattering, voices raised in conversation. The train that had brought Victoria to Yuma all those years ago still ran through town, its whistle echoing across the desert. But Victoria no longer felt the pull of elsewhere. She was exactly where she belonged, in the arms of the man who had seen a woman and child that nobody claimed and had the courage to say they were his. In the end, that was the story. Not of rescue or salvation, but of choice. Pierce had chosen them. Victoria had chosen him. Together, they had chosen to build something lasting and real and full of love. And that choice, made in faith and hope on a dusty Arizona afternoon in 1883, had rippled forward through generations, creating a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. Arizona became a state in 1912, and Pierce and Victoria celebrated with all of Yuma. They were grandparents many times over by then, pillars of the community, their story known and admired. People pointed them out at town gatherings. There's Pierce Walker and his wife, the one who came on the train with a child nobody claimed, and he claimed them both. It was a good story. A true story. And most importantly, it was a love story, the kind that proved that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is claim what you love and refuse to let go. Victoria continued teaching until she was 70. Finally retiring when her joints got too stiff to manage the walk to the schoolhouse every day. Pierce ran the ranch until he was 75, only stepping back when Samuel and Sarah insisted, gently but firmly, that it was time. They spent their final years much as they had spent their first, together. They took slow rides around the property, watched sunsets from their porch, told stories to ever-growing numbers of grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren. They held hands through church services and town dances and family dinners. Pierce died first, in his sleep, at the age of 82, in the winter of 1925. Victoria woke one morning to find him peaceful beside her, gone so gently she had not even felt him leave. The grief was enormous, a physical thing that threatened to consume her. But their children rallied around her, and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren, and she found she was not alone. She had never been alone, not since that day she found Samuel and decided to become a mother. She lived 3 more years, long enough to see Samuel's oldest son take over full management of the ranch, long enough to see Michael return from the East permanently and build a practice in Yuma, long enough to see Sarah's daughter announce she intended to study law and become the first female lawyer in Arizona. "You started something," Samuel told her on her 86th birthday, surrounded by so much family they had to hold the party in the barn. "When you got on that train with me when you came to Yuma and refused to be anything other than exactly who you were, you started something that's still growing." "I just loved you," Victoria said simply. "That's all I ever did. Loved you, loved your father, loved all of this." She gestured around at the assembled family. "Love is what makes a legacy, Samuel, not land or money or even blood. Just love." She died peacefully that autumn, on a golden October afternoon very much like the one when she had first arrived in Yuma 45 years earlier. Her last words were, "Tell Pierce I'm coming home." They buried her next to him on the hill behind the ranch house, where the cottonwoods grew tall and the river could be heard in the distance. The headstone read, "Victoria Lane Walker, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and teacher." She claimed a child, and in doing so claimed a destiny. Samuel, now 62 years old himself, stood at the grave long after everyone else had gone, looking at the 2 stones side by side. "Thank you," he whispered to the wind, "for choosing me, for choosing this life, for showing me what family really means." The ranch continued, passed down through generations, the story of its founding becoming the stuff of family legend. Great-great-grandchildren who never knew Victoria and Pierce nonetheless grew up hearing about the woman who arrived by train with a child nobody claimed, and the lonely cowboy who said, "I claim you both now." It became a touchstone, a reminder that family is not always about blood, that love is a choice, that bravery sometimes looks like a desperate young woman on a train platform, and that home is built one courageous decision at a time. The Double W Ranch still operates today, one of the oldest continuously running family ranches in Arizona. In the main house, carefully preserved in a glass case, are Victoria's journal, Pierce's first hat, Samuel's baby blanket with its pinned papers, and a photograph from 1915 showing Pierce and Victoria surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and the beginning of their great-grandchildren. They are smiling in the photograph, hands linked as always, faces weathered by years of desert sun but eyes still bright with love. Anyone looking at that photograph can see the truth of their story written plainly on their faces. This was a love that conquered loneliness, that turned two separate people into a family, that proved the bravest words in the English language are sometimes the simplest. I claim you. Now. Both. Forever. And that, in the end, was exactly what they got.